What's up everyone, Dave Dustin here. This video I'm making for you is going to be all about the 1946 Century Publications Superior Comics, the non-covered comics line. I'm going to make a video just to index them all. I'm going to put them in alphabetical order. There's only 14 of them. It's going to make it real easy for everyone to identify exactly what comics were part of this series. People have asked me about coverless comics, see if they were part of the series. Now you'll know exactly which comics are part of this non-covered series that were published without covers to begin with. And I'm going to go over a mail call, another reason why I'm making this video, because I just got a couple more in. I bought a couple more of the non-covered comics. And in the background for everyone, because it's all about Canadian comics, these are all Canadian edition comics on my rack I have in the background. Everyone take a look at. These are all published here in Canada in the 40s and 50s. Some really cool, really rare stuff up there too, take a look at. So, mail call, just arriving from London, England area. Another copy of Mr. Lucifer Comics. This is the first ever full cover-to-cover anthology horror comic ever distributed in the United Kingdom. It was distributed in London, England by Streamline Books, 1946. It was published up here in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. If you look at the indicia, it's overprinted Mr. Lucifer Comics, published by Crestwood Publishing Company, 26 Denison Square, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Printed in Canada, all material copyrighted in Canada. So the first story is Mr. Lucifer. This is actually Spook Comics from the United States. Spook Comics was the first ever anthology-style horror comic that was published in the United States. Bailey Publications, 1945. It beat out Avon's Eerie Comics by a couple years. So this is the 1946 Canadian published edition that was then shipped over, solely distributed in the United Kingdom in London, England. We were never distributed this horror comic. This was not distributed here in Canada. If you want to know more about that, look at my other video about the first horror comic, and I'll tell you all about that in there. And if you want to know more about these Canadian horror, all these Canadian comics from the 1946 line, I made a video when I unboxed this. This is an extremely rare bound edition from the Dennis Gifford collection. Now, Dennis Gifford, he was an artist in London, England area back in the 40s. He was a comic collector, and he was an author of multiple history of comic books. He wrote all kinds of books about different comics, international comics and British comics and the history of comics. This was from his personal collection. I just got this late last year. It's fantastic. It has a lot of extremely rare comics in it. These are all the 1946 comics from Bailey Publications that were published up here by Century Publications, Superior Comics. There's some only copies known to exist in there. There's some one of only a couple copies to exist in there. Fantastic book. You have to watch a video I made about that. It's over an hour and a half long. I go over all these non-covered comics by Century. And I look at all the original artwork that was just auctioned off by Weiss Auctions last year. It's a fantastic video, great resource, being able to index that online. Also coming with this Mr. Lucifer Comics was another copy of the Conquerors. This is really cool. This is actually unread, in a way. I've never had a comic like this. None of these other ones like this or any comic I've ever seen, but multiple pages. We have 4 pages in a row that are all still connected. So it's like an entire sheet of paper was used to make these comics, and it was folded over and folded over again. Then here on further in, it's again, the tops of the pages are all connected still. It's like it was an uncut sheet that was bound into the book. So the tops of the pages, because it never got cut properly, they're all still attached. You can't open the pages. You can't read the story for these 4 pages in a row at the front and another 4 further on. Still sealed. That's really cool. So I got a few copies of this now, Conquerors. And with this, the Mr. Lucifer, that Conquerors is kind of it's not the rarest of them all. I have a few of them, I think, 2 or 3 of them. I've seen another few go for sale. There's one for sale right now on eBay in the UK. It's been up for sale for over a year. It's missing a staple though, so the pages are not bound together anymore. I've seen a few of them. Mr. Lucifer, we are now at 5. So since I made that last video, 2 more have come up. So the first ever Mr. Lucifer Comics, known to exist in these modern times of the internet. There might be more around, it's just I don't know of them. I haven't found them anywhere. I can't find them anywhere online. I talk to collectors, I search for these daily. I talk to auction houses, I search auctions and search eBay. I've seen 5 of these now. The first one was, I believe, in 2018. First one, this was actually on sale eBay Canada. The only non-covered edition I have ever seen for sale in Canada. They were selling other British items also. So like someone had brought it over from like London, England area, and they sold a bunch of British stuff on this eBay. This was for sale, it was $250. It was for sale for in 2018. You can see it's got some creases, got some little nicks out here and there, a little dirty. It had a sticker over the 60, a big round sticker that said 90, and a 1 shilling sticker also on that as well. You can see the spot where the sticker came off. They sold it with the sticker on the side. They still kept it. So that was the first one known to exist. And then this was the second one known to exist. I found this. It's got the shilling sticker over the 60 price. And then the third copy known to exist was this one I found here in a Dennis Gifford bound collection. And then after putting all this stuff online and all over the internet, I did get a response back. Only one response ever about any of these books of someone else having one. And it was Steve Fry had wrote to me that he had seen one in London, England area at a shop. He didn't get it, but a friend of his, Danny Drummond, that was there did purchase it. So he has the 4th copy I now know of to exist. And then this is the 5th copy. And this one, you can see the difference here. It has a little white sticker on the red sticker. So that's probably a 9D sticker in white over the 60 stamp. And then a shilling sticker on top of that. Like they said, the other book, it had a bigger 9D sticker. But yeah, that's fantastic. Only 5 known to exist. And right here, 3 of the only 5 known to exist. That's fantastic. I love this old horror comics. The horror comics are my favorite. Also coming with that mail call, I got Nostalgia About Comics, finally. And this was compiled by Phil Clark and Mike Higgs, which is kind of funny because I bought this bound edition from the Dennis Gifford collection. He had passed away 2000. His estate auctioned off 2001. It was purchased from the estate by Phil Clark and sat in his collection for the last 20 years until the end of 2021 when I purchased this from him. So that's kind of a neat little connection there. This book came, it's got all kinds of British comics in it. And it's also got, at the back here, there's a couple pages of Canadian comics. So here's a bunch of the covered comics. It was only in like 1946, around 1946, that we sent comics over to the UK, try and break into the market over there and test the international waters. Several different companies, F.E. Howard and Maple Leaf and Anglo and Century Superior. There's a bunch of companies that sent over comics. And you can tell them all, they all have the British pricing on them, 60, 90 pricing. Some also have cents pricing of 10 cents or 15 cents. Some is just in a British pricing. I got a few of those comics there up on the rack and also in the bound volume. Then another page, Active Comics, Unusual Comics, Triumph Comics, Joke Comics, and a bunch of other stuff that was in Canada and in Great Britain with covers. And then this page, this is the only article I have seen in any book anywhere that talks about these non-covered comics. So just to review quickly, the first little bit of paragraph. A selection of Canadian coverless comics that could be bought in the UK during the 40s. The majority of these were remainders. The retailer would rip off the covers as proof of unsold copies, but instead of scrapping the contents, they would be packaged up and used as ballast. Upon entry to these shores, they were then sold either without the original covers or occasionally with special fake covers printed for them. So back then, and even now, people thought that these were remainder copies. People thought that these had covers and they were distributed here in Canada, sold with covers, and then the remainders, they ripped the covers off, send them back to the publisher, to the distributor, and they'd get a refund. The distributors at the market stalls would get their money back for unsold copies. And then they thought that these were all bound up and then sent over to the UK to then be sold over there. Our unsold stuff, our junk would be sold over there, and they'd get them up dirt cheap there. Well, they did that with some American comics. I've read about that even before World War II. I've read in some books that they were buying remaindered copies in bulk from the United States and also from Australia, I had read. And they were getting them for like a penny each and selling them for 6 cents each over there. And that's how they did sell a whole bunch of comics, but not these Canadian editions. These were never for sale here. They were never for sale with covers or without covers. They were sent directly to the UK to test international waters. Now, you can find out a lot more if you want to know more about that history. I had a video, like I said, when I unboxed this, I go over the history of comics, and I can tell you all about it. It's a very long, in-depth history. I even just tell a bit of it, really. I don't even know all of it. There's a very extensive amount of information out there. But basically, at the time, here's a quick little recap, is there was trade embargoes during World War II. So from 1940 to 1945, you couldn't import American comics. No non-essential goods could come over here to Canada. So we publish our own pure Canadian content, colored covers, black and white interiors, like that Captain Commando up there that has the first Zord in it. So we had this Canadian stuff until 1946. After the war, you were allowed to then bring over the matrices and printing plates and that, and you could reprint American stuff here in Canada after the war. There were still paper shortages, so stuff's still super rare. They had paper rationing still, but we brought this up. So Century bought a ton of artwork. Almost everything, if not everything, that was published by Bailey Publications in the United States. It was probably a going out of business sale. They probably had a fire sale. And Century Superior Comics bought up all this artwork from them, published all these comics. Some comics they made were sold here in Canada with cents prices and with covers. There were some covers, some that had covers, they were sent to the UK, they were sold with covers, they had cents prices, and they had British pricing, 60 or 90. And then there's these non-covered ones. We were never distributed these. They were just sent to the UK. And that is all. I don't know why they didn't have covers. Maybe because of paper rationing, they couldn't get the covers at the last minute. They were advertised with covers, but they didn't come out with covers. Maybe they, just to save money, they decided they couldn't afford to put covers on them all. They didn't buy all the artwork from Bailey, and they just bought the interior stories and just sent them over that way because of monetary reasons. Not quite sure. But that's a quick little recap for you. So I'm going to go through the comics now, alphabetical order by story, just to make life real easy, because some of these comics, they don't have titles at all. Like some of them, you can go by the American title. Some don't have American titles. So some of these stories, some of this artwork was done by the American company, Bailey, but nobody in the States published a few of these books. So a few of these, this is the only publishing of it, and they have no titles. But we'll get into that as I go through them. So here's the one and only advertisement for the non-covered comics. Here's a couple little mysteries real quick. It says here, Better Grade Publications. It's a house ad in a Century Publications book, a Superior Comics book. Here's another house ad of theirs. This is advertising the covered comics. These all had these exact glossy covers and the titles that are shown. And it says here, Century Publication with their logo. These are all non-covered. They didn't get these covers or these titles that are advertised, which is kind of strange. And it has Better Grade Publications. If anyone can find information about Better Grade Publications, let me know. I can't find anything about them anywhere. All these books, these were all series by Bailey Publications. They were supposed to be multiple issues of each. They had artwork done for multiple issues, number 2s, number 3s. Most of them, they never published or silver printed the number 2s and number 3s. They just had one issue of each, and it didn't go beyond the number 1. And then they went out of business. Anyway, Better Grade. Never heard of Better Grade Publications. I don't know why they wouldn't say Century Publications like their other house ad or Superior Comics, because Better Grade is not on any of these comics. These are all the non-covered comics. These are covers for them. There is no Better Grade. Not sure who that is. It might have been something to do with paper rationing, so that they could get more paper. They used to come up with different companies, or they could have, you know, subcontracted out to a company to use their paper rations to have someone else print them. But these are all Superior Comics, Century Publications. And there was another mystery, now that I think about it. Mr. Lucifer, which is Spook by Bailey, and also Snowman Comics, which is Tally Ho by Bailey. Only those two have in the indicia 26 Denison Square, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, published by Crestwood Publishing Company. There is no Crestwood Publishing Company that I can find any history of, other than the American company. This has nothing to do with the American company Crestwood that did Frankenstein, Black Magic. Totally separate. I don't know if it was they made up this name to get the paper rationing again, or if there was an actual company that was called Crestwood Publishing in Toronto, and they just used their paper allotment. They paid them off to be able to print more books. It's only on those 2 out of the 14. Can't find any information on this company. And 26 Denison Square, Toronto, Canada, it's a row townhouse. Like, they did have little shops in these houses on the main floor, and people lived upstairs. Some of them were just houses that people lived at, just residences. It's another mystery. If anyone can I find any information about Crestwood Publishing or better grade publications, let me know. I think it's just for paper rationing. Anyway, we'll get into the comics. 14 comics by title: Boogeyman #1, Boogeyman #2, Cisco Kid, Conquerors, Dr. Mercy, Firetop, Golden Lad, Jinx, Mr. Lucifer Comics, Skunky Shopkeeper, Snowman Comics, Splash Waters, Zorda Mighty #2, and Zorda Mighty #3. Those are the only 14 known non-covered comics. I have all of these in my collection. I have multiples of some of them. These are the only 14 I have been able to find so far. So, I'll show you these in order. Boogeyman #1. I can't 100% guarantee it, only 99.9%. This is the only copy known to exist. It is inside this bound volume. It does not have overprinting. It does not say Century Publications or Superior Comics or a price of $60. There's no overprinting. It was missed. As far as I know, it was half. This book is actually Mary Comics. That's Mary Comics there. Half the stories. And half the stories are from Zoom Comics. So apparently they took these 2 comics, Mary Comics, Zoom Comics, took half the stories from each, combined them into this one book, and I believe this was supposed to be called Boogeyman #1. But right now, it has no title. Boogeyman is just the name of the first story in the book. It was non-covered. There's no title for this book, but it should have been probably, there's probably copies out there that say Boogeyman Volume 1, #1. And I say that because the next comic, Boogeyman #2. So that Boogeyman #1 had no indicia overprinted on it. The next book inside this bound volume is this Boogeyman #2, also not overprinted. So this photo is from the Grand Comic database of someone uploaded, so there's at least one other out there in the world. And it has Century Publication at the top. Boogeyman Volume 1, #2, 1946. Published by Century Publishing Company, 2382 Dundas Street, West Toronto. That's the Superior Comics address. And it's got a $60 price. That is not printed on my copy. Mine was missed. I know of 4 comics where the indicia was not printed. I don't know how it was missed. I would have thought that would be on the black printing plate. But apparently it was overprinted later somehow on a different press. So I found those 2 are in here. They have no indicia. And I have a Golden Lad #1, and it was missed. It has no indicia. And I just last month, or I guess 2 months ago in, I believe it was December 2021, I saw another copy of Golden Lad go for sale on eBay in the UK, and it also had the overprinting missed. There was no indicia printed on it. So therefore it's also not the American comic. The American comic had an indicia at the bottom for the American version. They removed that from the printing matrix, from the printing plates, so that wasn't on there, and then they put on the Canadian indicia and address later. So anyway, Boogeyman #2. Also, never published before. All the stories in this book that I have in here, these stories were never published in any American comic book. So to get these, you have to find the British distributed edition of this Canadian comic. It was never in the United States. It was never in Canada. Boogeyman Comics #2. The next is Cisco Kid Comics. This also in this bound volume. It's the only copy I know of that exists. There is no photo of this on the Grand Comic database. It's not listed. I can't find any copy anywhere. That's the American version, Cisco Kid Comics. Only copy that I know of this Canadian edition is inside this bound volume. Next, The Conquerors is the first story title. If you look at it, it's got the Century Publication Comics, published by Superior. It says at the bottom, there is no price. There is no title for this comic. It has no name. The original American is Conqueror Comics. The first story title is The Conquerors. So this would be, I guess, Conqueror Comics, the Canadian edition. Next, we have, first story title is Dr. Mercy. So this is Zoom Comics. So they took half of Zoom and half of Mary Comics to make Boogeyman. This is fully Zoom Comics inside of this Dr. Mercy. So, oh, here's Conquerors. So I just showed that. So here's a couple other copies of Conquerors I have. Got 3 copies of that now. And I've seen a few others, so it's not that rare of one. Same with Dr. Mercy. I've seen a few others go for sale. Here's 2 copies I have of Dr. Mercy. There's another copy inside the bound volume. Not that rare of them all, that is. There's a few of them around. But again, this has no title. That's the first story is Dr. Mercy. So this would be Zoom Comics, the Canadian edition. All right. This is a cool one also. So this is Firetop. So this is inside this bound volume. Is the only copy known to exist. Never seen another copy of this anywhere else. The original is Slapstick Comics. See, this is where it gets strange too, is with that advertisement I showed you. So they have Slapstick, Trophy, Spook, Tally-Ho, Make-Believe. So Slapstick, that is this Firetop. Trophy Comics is the Jinx is the first story. This Flying Horse is from a different comic strip, Sir Galahad. Spook, that is that's Mr. Lucifer Comics. Mr. Lucifer Comics, the title was Spook. Tally-Ho, that's Snowman Comics, because the Tally-Ho cover was never put on it. Make-Believe, I've seen original art for Make-Believe. As far as I know, they never actually published any Make-Believe. That image is from Zor number 3 in the thumbnail there. So they planned on publishing these with covers. These are the covers that they would have had on them. These are the titles that would have been on the covers. There's no reason why you would make an ad advertising titles of comics that don't exist. These titles were never published because the covers were never published. Just the first story titles, which are totally different. So they called this Slapstick in their ad. There's Slapstick Comics, the American version. The first story is Firetop. In the Canadian edition, they took out this entire paragraph and they put in the word comics. Kind of like here, they stamped comics. So this Mr. Lucifer is the first story. It became Mr. Lucifer Comics in the indicia. And then same with Tally-Ho is the first story, Snowman. It became Snowman Comics in the indicia. So those are the titles. What is in the indicia is what we go with. This one, the indicia says Firetop. Does not say Firetop Comics. They took out this entire paragraph of text from the story to stamp the word comics on it. And they didn't even call it Firetop Comics in the indicia. So you're missing that whole paragraph. I guess they wanted to make it look like this was the cover and not just the splash page. But then other ones that have all writing, they didn't even stamp the word comics. So they have no title. It doesn't make any sense. Then the next one we get to is Golden Lad. So this is on the Grand Comic Database. There's no photo. Here's a photo of one of my copies of Golden Lad. That's what the American original cover would look like. Never had a cover. It's non-covered, of course. Golden Lad. Here's my copies. Stamped a little differently. So this one, Century Publications, published by Superior Comics. This one has a 6D price stamped on it. That's not stamped on the other ones. There's no 6D price. And this one is, like I said, one of the ones, it is missed. There is no indicia. There's no Century Publications, Superior Comics at the bottom. So it's not the American version. The American version has an indicia at the bottom. They removed that from the printing matrix and the plates, and they were supposed to stamp it overprinted like these. Never got overprinted. And I saw another one just like this, also not overprinted, that sold on eBay in December. The next one, first story is The Jinx. So this is one we're not quite sure what to call this exactly. It's published by Superior Publications, Century Publication Comic. First story is The Jinx. That's the original cover art that was never used because this was never published by anyone else. So there's no American version of this. It was created in the United States by Bailey Publications. No one published it down there. We published it in Canada, but we never even got distributed. It got distributed in the UK. It was originally called Pot O' Gold, was a title that is on the original artwork. You can see was even on the front cover. They changed Pot O' Gold and took the writing off, and they changed it to Trophy at the last minute. But then they never even used this cover. So the first story is The Jinx. According to the original cover art, it was Pot O' Gold, but I guess we'll go with the original cover that had been altered and called this Trophy Comics. And it was only ever published here in Canada. You know the one they changed it? That was Splash Waters. It was originally Barrel O' Fun, and they changed it to Full of Fun when they reprinted it later in the 60s. So the same thing happened here. They took Pot O' Gold. I guess they didn't like that title with the O. Then there's my copy. Trophy Comics. First story, The Jinx. That's really cool. Then there's one photoed on a Grand Comic Database. There's at least a couple of these that exist. Next we have Mr. Lucifer Comics, of course. Mr. Lucifer, originally titled Spook. 5 of them known to exist. 3 of the 5 right in front of you here right now. So this one has the indicia, of course. So this is called Mr. Lucifer Comics, is the title of this comic. Never had a cover to begin with. First horror comic ever distributed in London, England. Next, first story title is Skunky Shopkeeper. There is no title in the indicia. First story is Skunky Shopkeeper. It is Funland Comics #1. So this would be Funland Comics #1, the Canadian edition. I've seen a couple of these already on the internet. There's a few of them around I know of. Snowman Comics. This is really cool because this is John Giunta and Frank Frazetta, really well-known artist. Frank Frazetta, he did work for EC later on. This was his first published work, Snowman Comics. It was originally Tally Ho. It's the American title on it. We never had the cover. In the indicia, it's titled Snowman Comics. Here's a copy of that. Snowman Comics. These are I only have 2 copies that are known to exist in the world. There's a copy right here in the bound volume that Dennis Gifford had. And here's the one that's out of mine. So this is the first one I ever found. This one had started me collecting all these. When I found this Snowman Comics, which is the Canadian edition of Tally Ho, I found this 2018. This is what got me started collecting them, when I found out this was the first artwork ever done by Frank Frazetta, and nobody had ever seen a copy. I checked all over North America. I contacted the Frazetta Museum and William Frazetta, the family. No one's ever heard of this. Collectors have never seen this or heard of this. Nobody over here in North America has a copy of this other than myself that I know of, and I have 2 of them here now. Fantastic there. Snowman Comics. Next, Splash Waters. So that is also inside this bound volume. That's the one I was talking about. It was originally called Barrel O' Fun. Originally, they changed it from Barrel O', well, sorry, there's no cover that I know of. There's nothing found in the archives for Barrel O' Fun. Later, it was redone by IW Comics, Super Comics in the 60s. They called it Full of Fun. So maybe Bailey changed the original cover from Barrel of Fun to Full of Fun. But this is a totally different cover that was done in the 60s and was reprinted. This has no title on it, Splash Waters, so I don't know if we call this Barrel of Fun, the Canadian edition, or if we call it Full of Fun, because it had never been published before. And there is no known cover kicking around for it. It wasn't in the archives. Then we get Zora the Mighty #2. So Zora the Mighty #1 had a cover, but then 2 and 3 did not. They had covers made up. Zora the Mighty #2 actually has, I think it's Golden Lad inside of it or something totally different. And Zora the Mighty #3, they never use a cover art. You can find it online. You look at my other video and I show all the cover art and everything. So this is Zora the Mighty #2. It actually has it in the indicia. Zora the Mighty Comics Volume 1 #2 is written at the bottom. So there's the cover for Zora #2. Oh, sorry, it had a Red Band Comics #1 was inside this book. So So there's my copies. I got a couple copies of Zora the Mighty. I've seen a couple others of this book. There's a few of them kicking around. And finally, Zora the Mighty number 3. There's at least one other one kicking around I've seen online a picture of. It actually has it in the indicia, Zora the Mighty Comics Volume 1 number 3, right at the bottom. So this was the original artwork, I believe. I found this online. I think that was supposed to be the cover for it was unused. And then in the 60s, once again, IW Super Publishing reprinted it. They put this updated cover on it and they called it Fantastic Adventures number 12. But that's Zora the Mighty number 3 is inside of it. The original printing 1946, Century Publications, Superior Comics. And there's my Zora the Mighty number 3. That is all of the non-covered comics by Superior Comics Century Publications. There's 14 of them that I know of. There may be others. That's the only ones I know. But they also did covered comics. I'll just flip through these quickly to show you these. So some of these were Canadian only distributed. They only have a cents price. Some of them were here in Canada and also sent to London, England. And I find them more out there than I do over here. So they probably shipped over more than they distributed here in Toronto, Canada. There's 19 total. So 19 and 14, there's like 33 books total done by Century that I know of. Said there might be a couple others that have just not been found yet. But 33 total I know of in 1946. And the other thing, these came out, they had never done comics before this. They were making army gag books and joke books in the 40s, like in 42 and 45. And they didn't really do much in the 40s. 1946, they just first started making comics, and they made a few dozen different comics. And they sent almost all of them over to Britain to test out the international waters. And then that was it. Just in 1946. 1947, they only had like 5 different series of comics that came out. But they ran, like, some ran monthly, so there's like 10, 12 issues. Some of them ran bi-monthly, so there's like 6 issues. But they only had 5 series of comics. Whereas they had dozens in 1946. Just didn't work out very well, with the international sales. But then people always thought that these were remainder copies, so they didn't really like them. They didn't want them. They wanted the glossy covered American comics. They thought, when these, especially these non-covered ones, they thought that they were incomplete, just junk and garbage, and they destroyed them even more than they destroyed the normal comics. Like, people barely kept comics as is. It's ephemera. It's you just use them and destroy them, or recycle them, pulp them. People didn't really collect comics. It's like newspapers. People don't really collect them, especially back in the 1940s. And then on top of it, these had no glossy covers on them. They were just destroyed all over the place. Even now, people are still probably destroying them all over the place because they think they're in poor shape. They're incomplete. They're just destroyed. Nobody's going to CGC these things. Everyone thinks that they're coverless, but they're non-covered. They never had covers. These ones had covers. So here is the one and only ad for them. So this is in Jeep Comics number 2 that I have down there. It advertises Jeep Comics number 1, but they had both come out already in the States before. And it's got a Zora the Mighty number 1, which had a cover. Twinkle Comics, Space Nomad Comics, and Circus Comics. And Circus Comics is the one that had the ad in it for the non-covered comics. So it came out at the exact same time, that covered comic and these non-covered comics and these 2 ads, all in 1946. So there's 19 total. We'll just flip through these quickly. So those I put in alphabetical order by the first story title, just to make life easy. The actual title of the books, totally different. These ones, they're in book title in order alphabetical. Blazing Comics. Blue Circle Comics. Bombardier Comics. Circus Comics. Hurricane Comics. Jeep Comics number 1. Jeep Comics number 2. Latest Comics number 1. There's no photo from number 2 of Latest Comics. Latest Comics number 3. And like I was saying about the prices, so Latest Comics number 1 only has a 10-cent price, so it may have only been distributed here in Canada. Some of these have the cents and 60. This one, Latest Comics number 3, only has a 60 price, so it was probably only distributed in the UK. A lot of these comics were only distributed in the UK, and some of them were in both. Red Circle Comics, And I have a bunch of these, like this Red Circle Comics and Latest Comics #1 and some of the others are in this bound volume. You have to look when I go through this, and I actually identify all the books are in this, because when I bought this, it was a total mystery mail call. I didn't even know what half the comics were in this. Like this extremely, extremely valuable book of bound comics of 17 comics. I only knew what like less than half were from the photos that I was given. And the other ones I had no idea. I've identified them all, and there's half of them are non-covered, and half of them had covers that someone removed when they bound them together. Only one of these 17 actually has a cover inside there, front cover only. But the other ones I identified, and I have a bunch of these I'm showing you right now. So that was Red Circle Comics. Space Nomad Comics. See, this is funny. I'm not sure if almost the entire contents are the same, just like a few added pages in some of these, I imagine, is the only difference, because these are like huge volumes. But there's these star-studded comics, 128 pages full color. So this is the one that is bound inside of here. It's the only one that has a cover on it. The cover inside here, it does not have the Century logo or 25 cents. Those are just blank circles, because it was a UK distribution. But, so there's that star-studded, 128 pages. And these are all 25 cents. This is another star-studded, 194 pages. Very similar cover. So it might be a lot of the exact same with a few extra stories. I don't know. Because then there's more, another 196 page star-studded comics. And another 196 page star-studded comics. And another one. Also, all 25 cents, 196 pages, all those ones. They also came out with 3 Ring Comics #1. That's also in the bound volume. 3 Ring Comics #2. 3 Ring Comics #3. I used to have this. I've sold it now. That's actually the cover from Pep Comics, the first appearance of Archie. That's the cover that was used by the American version. This does not have Archie in it. This Canadian edition that was UK distributed, it has 3 Ring Comics #2 in it. It's just funny animal comics in black and white. There's Twinkle Comics. Zord the Mighty Comics #1. And Zord the Mighty Comics #2. So that's all the comics put out by Century Publishing.